I am super excited to share with you all our benchmark report. So this is our 2024 Employee and Customer Experience Benchmark Report. And as Alina mentioned, you guys are going to be the first ones to get access to this report. So if you are not on your phones and you have that handy, you can get out your camera and scan the QR code that's on the screen here. That will provide you with a link to download the benchmark report so you can get the full report. Right now, we're going to spend the next 30 minutes or 28 minutes going over what's in there, but just at a high level, right? There's a lot more information to cover than what we will be going through in today's session. So if you get that opportunity to download that and scan the QR code, we'll provide that to you a couple of times during this quick session that we have here today. For our clients that are on, you've maybe seen the updated scores in your dashboard and reporting. Those get released in January each year. And so that has been available to them. But this takes a little bit further look at exactly what's happening in the industry, what changes we've seen from last year. And so this benchmark report is comprised of the data that was collected throughout the last year. It has over 1,000 dealers data that has been aggregated together. We measure the voice of customer net promoter score. We look at the employee NPS score, and we also measure reputation scorecards as well when it comes to online reviews. This is really an advantageous tool for our dealers to have the ability to compare themselves to the rest of the industry. As Ryan mentioned in some of the earlier sessions, a lot of our clients use this for goal setting purposes. So this allows them to get some idea of what they need to be working towards, or maybe even where they're excelling and highlighting with their team on the things that they're doing really well. So we can go ahead, Alina, and kind of advance. This is what you'll see when you go to that page to download, but we can kind of dive in from here if we want to advance to the next slide. Okay, so we're going to talk about customer experience benchmark reports first. So here we've aggregated the data together. We always spend a lot of time analyzing this information to understand what's interesting, new, and different, what's going on in the equipment space. Similarly to last year, one of the perspectives we wanted to take a look at was dealership size. It seems to be something of focus and important in the industry. As you know and live and breathe this every day, there's a lot of mergers and acquisitions happening in our space. And so we have dealers that are consistently transitioning from these different categories that we refer to as small, mid-size, and large dealers. Our smaller dealers are those that are comprised of 1 to 5 locations. And then we have our mid-size dealers, which are 6 to 19 locations, and our large dealers are 20 plus locations. And so we have here the benchmark scores broken down by each one of those different dealer sizes. And as you can see, there's some variance between those, not significantly, 80 with our large dealers, and then increasing to an 81 for our mid-size. And then our smaller dealers, again, those 1 to 5 locations with a NPS score of 82. I think what gets really interesting as we start to break down the data a little bit further down by department. But I did want to highlight, as you know, we categorize our industries. Some of you may know and some of you may not know that are new on here. We do benchmark data separately based on each different industry. So one thing we did want to point out is that when we compared agriculture and construction dealerships, the benchmark scores were actually the same, with the overall average NPS being of 81. That isn't always the same in the case where it is the same, but in this last year, that is what we were seeing in the data. Where we did see some more variance, though, is when we look at the NPS score by department. So we presented this information to you last year as well, but as we collect this feedback across the different industries, we look at the feedback provided by your customers to understand what their level of engagement is and recommendation and satisfaction with each one of these particular departments. And so you'll see on the right-hand side here of the screen, we have the parts department, which remained unchanged with an 83. And then we have our service department, which has been our lower scoring departments for a number of years now. Unfortunately, decreased again by a point from last year. So this is something that we definitely want to keep a focus in on. We talked about this a lot last year, where we actually saw an increase that was pretty impressive was on the sales experience. So an increase of 5 points here from the previous year. And then the rental data for those departments remain unchanged from the prior year. So I wanted to talk a little bit about maybe why that is as we dive into it a little bit deeper, as well as provide you with some things to focus in on and opportunities for improvement when we start to look at your focus for 2024. So as Ryan and I were discussing this ahead of time and looking at some of the results that were delivered to us as we analyzed this data, it was interesting taking a closer look at the parts department. Obviously, we had some real challenges in recent years with inventory, and that doesn't seem to be the case any longer, where we're not dealing with a shortage of parts. And so, some of the things we've heard today, even throughout today's session, is maybe turnover in the parts department, not as easy to staff, some younger, newer people entering in at the parts counters. And so we may have lost some of that knowledge with the tenured staff that we had in the parts department. And so I think that maybe one thing that we want to focus in on, and we'll talk about that with recommendations coming up here next, is product knowledge is going to be really important. I think when we talk about focusing in on the Net Promoter Score for the parts department in particular. And Ryan, if you got anything to add, feel free to chime in here.
No, I think, in preparation for our panel last week at the conference, and reading through a lot of the comments and things like that, I keep seeing on the parts side, I keep seeing these issues with lack of knowledge and, getting the wrong part. We talked about some of that in our session today. So there definitely is a training gap that exists on this parts side.
Yeah. Well, service has been a struggle. I think it's probably one of every dealership's top 3 challenges, right? When you ask them is, the service department, whether it be recruiting technicians and retaining them, staffing that department, getting work turned around, meeting the needs of the employees, et cetera. And we're seeing that, I think, trickle over to the customer side. We see that correlation on both the employee data as well on the customer data when it comes to the service department. And some things in particular that have stood out to us is convenience of hours, right? Which is interesting as we look at the other side with employees wanting flexibility with their schedule and that lifestyle balance. And then also, again, training. One of the things that we commonly see come back on the surveys often that really affects the service scores is not doing a very good job of communicating and explaining the work that's being done or when there's changes along the way. So that communication piece, especially as it pertains to the service department, is going to be key. On the sales side, as I mentioned, a 5-point increase there. Jordan talked a little bit about the importance, right, of the sales team and some of the focus and concern that dealers are expressing as it relates to sales, because they, on the other hand, have struggled with this inventory shortage. And in some ways, we're a bit of, as you mentioned, I think, order takers and not really solutions-based selling, but they're doing a good job based on the feedback from the customers that's being provided. So again, I think this is excellent reflection of that. Hopefully they can build upon this to continue to increase sales while the market is shifting. And now that we have products and in stock for them to be able to sell. But I think they really want to keep honing in on those processes. So focusing on explaining to customers and going over some of those key coverage opportunities, whether it's maintenance, warranty coverage, operating features. So all of those aspects of that final sales and delivery process.
Well, and Emily, one quick add on the sales side, some of that bump up in 2023 may be related to the easing of some of the supply channel issues. And so we may have kind of a little bit of a bump where people are just excited that they can actually get product now. So it's interesting to see 24 results to see whether or not after they kind of get over the initial excitement of actually having product, how the sales teams perform.
Yeah, that's a really great point. obviously there's a lot of concern, I think, and focus on sales in 2024 for certain. And so
Well,
it
we've
will be
heard,
really,
go ahead.
yes. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I think it'll be interesting to see, a year from now when we're looking at the 2025 report where things end up.
Well, and we've heard it, people saying, and I think we've heard today as well, that they feel like some of the salespeople have forgot how to sell. So
Yes.
um,
Mm-hmm.
it'll be interesting.
Definitely. I think on the rental side, again, consistency there for that portion of the business. One of the things that we definitely see where there's an opportunity for really improvement, is clarity on, especially when it comes to like billing and invoicing. That seems to be one of the biggest challenges or points of frustration that customers have with renting equipment with dealers. So if you have opportunities to be able to improve that process, streamline it, I know some of you mentioned throughout today's conversation some of the text messaging tools to be able to communicate where that works for your customers. Obviously, it may not work for all of them, but in some cases, again, finding that right method of contact, being able to get things done correctly the first time too, when it comes to billing, so there isn't sort of that back and forth and making adjustments. All right, so let's give you some recommendations. So for wherever you're at, I would say this with your customer experience journey, whether you have a program in place or not, if you are considering any areas of focus for strategy for 2024, training initiatives in your dealership, anything that focuses on the customer experience as well as customer service, this is what we're seeing coming back from customers and recommendations that we would be making to dealers today. So when it comes to parts, enhancing parts knowledge for new staff is going to be key. And I think we heard that from our panel today that came up in conversation. It's something that we're hearing throughout. And so I definitely think this is a point of focus for dealers. If you're not probably doing this, you probably will be falling behind when it comes to the competition. So really offering them that ability to become more informed around the products that they're selling and the parts themselves than just being able maybe to operate the software that they're, keeping track of everything in and clocking in and out, is getting a better understanding of what these actual parts and products are being used for. The other piece of it is elevating sales practice to solution selling. So just as we were talking about, um, all of our dealerships seem to be moving towards this solutions-based selling. It's not just a single piece of equipment. And really getting away from what we talked about, this order taking process that's been in place now for these last couple of years, as customers were coming to the dealership and just asking for products. They weren't having anything to go out and sell that was on the lot. Well, now there's equipment available, right? And so we are needing to move the equipment that's out there. And so how can we empower these teams to do that? And so getting them some training and education, focusing in on a more consultative approach and offering some value added solutions when they're selling. Jordan talked a lot about leveraging data that's available today to your marketing and sales teams to be able to focus in on maybe attaining some market share or acquiring some of those first time buyers as well. I think will really help dealerships with boosting their revenue and building better relationships. And our third recommendation on the customer experience side is improving service interactions. So definitely want to focus more in on communication and customer care. So that may be implementing processes. It may be a new tool that allows you to communicate better with customers. But again, continuing to focus on some of the soft skills training when it comes to the service department and finding ways to listen more effectively, have empathy with their customers, and then really focusing in on the communication piece. I think that's going to be key for these service departments to be successful. They are very important part of the process in that customer journey when it comes to your customers' repeat purchase. And so don't lose focus of this. It's going to be key in future purchases of new pieces of equipment for your customers. All right, let's talk about employee experience and where we ended up in 2024 with our benchmark reporting. So our eNPS insights. So here we're measuring the employee's willingness to recommend the dealership. Again, this is an aggregate score across all of the dealerships that we work with here. And so what we're seeing is that the overall eNPS is a 16. So I will preface that this with people on the call today. If you maybe are more familiar with customer net promoter score than you are employee net promoter score, you may be sitting here going, oh my gosh, this is terrible. How can the average customer NPS score be an 81 and then the employee score be a 16? So standard practice on the employee net promoter score across industries, so not even we're talking outside of heavy equipment, is a good score is a 5 to a 20. So much different than what we have on expectations on the customer side, which typically is any score above a 50 is a good net promoter score. So dealers are doing well, right within that range, with an average of 16. Our higher performing dealers, though, are really excelling. And I did want to point this out. So they actually have a net promoter score average that is above a 20. And so we are seeing much higher scores there. But as everyone knows in that promoter score, the range can be anywhere from a negative 100 to a positive 100. So it's a really wide range scale. For the dealers that we're working with, our range is anywhere from a negative 30 to a 50. So kind of right in the middle of that entire range that is available when calculating that promoter score. So we've seen some changes from 2021. It has increased as we look back at the last couple years. We wanted to look at some trending data to see how things were changing, especially post-COVID. There was a lot of changes during COVID, especially on the employee side. The market itself has shifted significantly in regards to employment. There's been some real challenges when it comes to recruiting and retaining, not just technicians, right, but in all positions. So kind of despite those challenges, we've seen increases, but we've also seen a real increase in dealerships' willingness to ask feedback of their employees. I would say pre-COVID, there was definitely some resistance to that and wanting to hear what their employees thought and felt about the organization. And it seems like dealers are coming to this place of recognizing that, they need to know if they want to be successful and retain employees, they do need to provide their employees with a voice to be able to share that feedback in a constructive manner, in a trusted place where they can remain anonymous, and feel comfortable sharing genuine feedback with the dealership.
Emily, I just add to that real quick. I think it's really interesting. I've seen a real shift over the last 3 to 5 years with organizations being willing to listen to what employees have to say. The people out there are saying that my voice has to count or I'm not interested in working here. And the employee survey is a great way and a relatively easy way to say to staff, your opinion counts. Now, if you don't do anything with that, it's a problem, right? But we are definitely seeing more and more organizations starting to realize the importance of engaging their staff. So I think it's critical.
Definitely. Yeah. So we do have some recommendations when it comes to employee engagement and retention. So focusing in on 2024, I think one of the things is that there's been a lot of emphasis on recruiting, and recruiting is not going away. Recruiting is something that we're going to need to continue to do. There was definitely some real retention challenges coming out of COVID. And so one of the things is, though, we probably need to get back to focusing more on retaining, right? Those employees that we have gone out and recruited, that we've invested in, right? And so how can we do that through cultivating a positive workplace and culture that values employees and their growth and investing in them? And so I think we just want to make sure that we prioritize that retention component and the culture within the organization. The other thing, and coincidentally, this has come up too, the second recommendation here is ensuring competitive compensation practices. So this has been a focus and something that came actually up in our panel last year at our summit. was a lot of dealers are investing in competitive compensation analysis. So to really help them be competitive when they are out there recruiting new staff is making sure that they are being competitive from a salary and compensation standpoint, as well as benefits and maybe other incentives that are being offered to competitors, whether it be in their industry or in other industries as well. And the interesting thing that's come up is this competitive compensation isn't just for new hires, right? We've been hearing from dealers that they're also taking a look at existing pay for current employees to make sure that they're being compensated fairly as well, tying that really back to the retention recommendation that we just talked about above. And so that may be difficult. Some of you may think that, how could I do that? Level setting, maybe compensation with existing staff. But in the long term, being able to keep that employee and not having to go out and replace them will be worthwhile. And then the third recommendation we have is investing in employee growth. Russ just mentioned that in our last session, talking about, the best compliment you can give an employee is to invest in them. And so we have heard from several dealerships that what they are doing is investing in leadership development plans or growth plans for their employees. And this is becoming more standard practice, especially with new staff that's coming in. And they are focusing heavily on their future. Where do they want to be? Where do they see themselves in 5 years? And how do we get them on a path to that? And so this will be key. We see this in the results where people are not doing this. There tends to be, some drop off in engagement after that first year of employment. And we're starting to see some improvement there, especially with the dealerships that are focused on or have a leadership or career path development plans in their dealerships. Okay, so our last part of our benchmark report I want to share with you is our reputation scorecard analysis. So we support dealers with helping them take a more proactive approach to managing their online reputation. So one key place of feedback that we're all familiar with would be Google reviews as an example. And so both employees and customers are leaving feedback about your organization online, whether you're asking them to do that or not, right? And so we are helping dealers proactively go out and ask their customers to leave reviews publicly on third-party sites like Google. And some of dealers that we work with are doing a really good job of keeping track of, what we call like their digital health or some metrics for online. In that case, we are doing so too and helping dealers measure what we consider to be their reputation scorecard. On average, dealers are doing quite well when it comes to their rating, right? I think whether you're doing something proactively today or not, in most cases, most stores have a pretty high rating. On average, we're seeing a 4.5. Where we see dealers who are not taking a proactive approach struggle is with their recency and volume. But the dealers that we're working with today are doing really well when it comes to recency and volume. They have reviews coming in consistently, primarily just due to the fact that there's an automated process. When the customer comes in and has a transaction, they'll receive a text message or an email with a request to leave a review. It takes a couple seconds, so it's easy to do. They've seen a significant increase in volume. So the number of reviews that they are attaining each year, new reviews, is quite high. On average, that was like 131 new reviews per store. So it's pretty consistent. You can see, over a year's time frame, they've got quite a few new reviews coming in there. So I think we've seen like a 3% increase in year over year compared to last year. If you're not doing this today, I think it's something that you guys should all be focusing in on. The digital marketing, as Jordan talked about, your digital presence is really important. This is where newer generations that are coming into the marketplace that you may be working with as customers are preferring to spend more of their time. So that customer journey, as Ryan talked about up front, in that pre-purchase and phase, a lot of this is being done digitally. and online. And so your website, your reviews, those things are just as important as any one of your given locations. It's basically just like a digital storefront, right? Online. So we can talk about a couple recommendations that we have here too when it comes to reputation management. So the first thing would be prioritizing consistency and review generation. I think this is a real primary pain point for a lot of dealers that don't have an automated process. You know, you may ask your sales team to go out and put forth an effort maybe for a month or so. Hey, every time a customer comes in, you know, you make a sale, would you ask them to leave a review? And they may do it for a while, and you may be able to incent them with a competition, and they may be successful at it, but it's short-lived, right? It's not consistent. And so trying to find a strategy that works for your dealership to encourage those reviews to come back at a steady pace. If you can try to get some new reviews every month is what you want, right? Those need to be consistently coming in order for you to get a really good grade when it comes to measuring, you know, your reputation score or health metrics. And so automating that is really, it piggybacks off of that consistency process. I think ideally where you can automate things, right? Alleviate that burden or additional responsibility on your team by you leveraging the data integration and tools that may be out there for you to access. It's key, right? It makes it easy. Again, that'll can help boost response rates. It'll increase productivity, not burden your staff down with having to handle more of those things manually on their behalf. And then the last one is leveraging positive feedback for amplifying your brand. So a lot of times I feel like marketers may overlook or forget that there's a lot of user generated content that's just sitting there available to you. It could be comments that are coming back from the surveys. It could be reviews that are being left for you on, you know, Google as an example. Capture that information, right? Utilize it, create a Canva post, an image to be able to share, promote it. It will really help amplify your brand and your reputation for customers. They love seeing what other customers are saying and doing with the equipment. So leverage that when and where possible. It'll create some additional social content for you and continue to repeat and reuse that. And I've seen some good classes recently at different conferences of how dealers are leveraging positive feedback for brand amplification. If you're interested in that, I'd be willing to, you know, connect you with dealers who are doing so today, if you're looking for any more information there. So again, just some last next steps that we have to leave you with, right? As we said at the very beginning of today's session, we want to make sure you have things to take away back to your dealership that you can implement. And there's a lot more detail in this benchmark report if you download that by scanning the QR code. It'll also be up on our website today as well. So if you happen to be listening to this on your phone and can't scan the QR code, you can always access it from satisfied.com. But what's next, right? So benchmarks, while it may be about the data that was collected last year, can really be leveraged to help you plan and help you improve in the coming year. And so as we look at this data, get a good understanding of where you are at relative to your competition. Try to identify maybe an area or two where you may be underperforming compared to the competition, as well as the areas where you're excelling. So try to find or highlight one or two of those areas and share that back with the rest of your organization. If you can focus in on something and how do you want to drive that improvement, you can leverage the recommendations that we just shared with you to make changes, or maybe you heard something in one of earlier session from maybe the panel discussion or one of our guest speakers that you're going to take back to implement. I would highly recommend that you leverage this information in building your own goals, as Ryan shared with you. A lot of our dealers utilize these benchmarks as their goals or bring them as data points in shaping their internal goals to help drive improvement throughout the year and really implementing a plan, right? That gets you from point A to point B to help you focus in on those areas that you identified in the beginning. And then you can go back and look at them and see at the end of the year, how did you do? And then you'll be able to compare yourself to the benchmark when those get released next year as well. So I appreciate everyone's time